After I put out my last video about Mortal Kombat 2, I kind of figured that we had finally sucked out every little last nugget of mystery that the game had to offer. But I was wrong. A comment that somebody left on the last video caused me to dig into it one more time. Dead KMK writes, in an old interview, Ed Boon was asked about Shawn Attacks, and he replied that he just named the fake counter on his cousin Shawn. And that really would be the last word on Shawn Attacks, except I couldn't find the interview. But in my opinion, what I did wind up finding was actually a lot more interesting. My search for this lost Ed Boon interview led me to an old Usenet Newsgroup. For those of you who don't know, before social media, before Reddit, even before message boards, people would share information in something called a newsgroup. And thankfully, unlike a lot of old message boards, we're actually able to take a look at what people posted in these Usenet newsgroups because Google archived them. And that brings us to this post in an old arcade newsgroup about Mortal Kombat 2, posted all the way back in January of 1994. At this point, Mortal Kombat 2 had only been out about 8 months or so. Essentially what happened was one of the users in the group went through Mortal Kombat 2's code and found all of the text. This text contains a lot of interesting revelations that I think haven't even really been mentioned at all since this post. On January 30th of 1994, John O'Coco writes, "Hi everyone. I got my hands on the binary of V2.1 ROMs of Mortal Kombat 2, and naturally took the time to wade through it for any texts. I have deleted the most, but here are the interesting ones. My remarks in square brackets, some additional empty lines are also added. And most of what we're gonna see now is pretty basic stuff, different lines in the text for when every character wins, time is up, draw, Kung Lao wins, Liu Kang wins, Cage wins, etc. The first really interesting thing that I find in this is that you have the secret characters at the end of the first group of wins texts. Smoke wins, Jade wins, and at that point Smoke and Jade had already been discovered, so that was no surprise to anybody. However, Noob Saibot wins. Noob Saibot? You see, at this point, the game was so new that people had not even discovered Noob Saibot yet, so they were debating about whether or not this was a real thing or a red herring, and eventually you could see people in the thread figuring out, wait a second, Noob is Boon backwards like Ed Boon, Saibot is Tobias backwards like John Tobias, the developers of the game, so they're kind of figuring out right now that that's kind of got something to do with a possible secret character. Well, geesh, that's impressive. I'm no genius, but that Noob Saibot sure looks like Tobias Boon, the two names of the designers. Any idea what this might mean? Just pondering. Noob Saibot, Boon Tobias, Ed Boon, John Tobias? Now, if you're watching this video, you're probably aware by now that Noob Saibot is a real character who was in Mortal Kombat 2 and subsequent games. However, there are some names in this list that didn't quite pan out into being Mortal Kombat 2 characters. Kano wins, Sonya wins, Tanya wins, Ermac wins, Ed Boon wins, John Tobias wins. The question we have to ask when we see lines like this inside the game's code is this something that was put there as a deliberate red herring to throw data miners off the trail of legitimate secrets, to incite people to spend money at the arcade to try and find something that's not there? Or is it something that they had planned that just didn't wind up panning out in this version or any later versions? We have Ed Boon wins, John Tobias wins. Maybe they just put their names in there as a silly little thing to laugh about as the developers, or maybe it's possible, especially knowing Midway in their history with little secret gags like this, maybe they were planning on having Ed Boon and John Tobias, get in there in front of the blue screen. I think they used a blue screen at that time, on throwing some, doing some moves and shit, have them be playable like NBA Jam did with their developers. Maybe somewhere there exists footage of John Tobias, Ed Boon getting there and trying their best at doing some kung fu and not having it pan out well enough for the game to actually use it. I really hope that that's what actually happened here and that footage is sitting in somebody's basement right now. Kano, Sonya, and Ermac are interesting ones in there. Kano and Sonya because, that was one of the biggest rumors for Mortal Kombat 2, that you could actually play as them somehow, or at the very least have Shang Tsung transform into them. But to me, by far, what is the most interesting of all of these names is Tanya, because as you know, Tanya was a character that wound up being introduced in Mortal Kombat 4. Of all of the names listed in there, Tanya is the one that, at the time especially, doesn't seem to have anything to do with anything. At the time, people were going with the idea that the character Tanya perhaps had something to do with Sonya. It is a very similar naming scheme, Tanya and Sonya. But knowing what the character is now, it seems much more likely that if they were planning on the character Tanya, it might have been a yellow palette swap with Katana, Melina, and Jade. It's possible that the concept for the character was getting tossed around as far back as Mortal Kombat 2. It also seems likely that others came to this conclusion that she would have been a yellow ninja if she were around for this phase of the game. There's been a lot of fan art made like this. There's a Mortal Kombat 2 Tanya Mugen character. What's interesting to me about all that, though, is that despite all these theories about her, I've never ever seen this actually referenced as being something that's actually in the code of the game. If the character of Tanya is something that was being thought about in this phase of Mortal Kombat 2's development to the point where her name made it into the code, it might actually lend some credibility to the idea that the other characters with names around her, like Kano, Sonya, Ermac, Ed Boon, and John Tobias, maybe they really weren't red herrings, but they were simply ideas that didn't make it to the final game. But without official word from the developers, this is all speculation, and we'll never know for sure unless they say something about it. But until next time, check out this other gaming video. I'm out of here.